A man arrived at Castle Darry with a message. He was shaking. He said the witch of Harrenhal had cursed him, that he would die if anyone laughed at what he had to tell. Someone laughed. He choked to death in moments. Witnesses saw the imprints of a woman's fingers on his throat. There was no woman in the room. Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. This is Mysteries of the Realm, Episode 7. Alys Rivers, the witch who outlived everyone. Here is what the histories agree on. Alys Rivers was a wet nurse at Harrenhal, lowborn, possibly a bastard daughter of Lord Lionel Strong, possibly not. The sources cannot even agree on that. During the Dance of the Dragons, she became the paramour of Prince Aemond Targaryen, the one-eyed prince, rider of Vhagar, the largest living dragon. She bore him a child. After Aemond died above the god's eye, she did not flee. She claimed Harrenhal. She held it. She proclaimed her infant son as king. Every attempt to remove her failed. And then the histories stopped mentioning her. No death, no surrender, no exile. The record simply goes silent. That silence is the investigation. Because the maesters who compiled these histories had 3 sources, and not one of them could agree on what Alys Rivers was. Grand Maester Munkun called her a serving wench who dabbled in potions. Septon Eustace called her a woods witch. Mushroom, the court fool, called her a malign enchantress who bathed in maiden's blood to preserve her youth. Munkun dismissed the magic. Eustace dismissed the woman. Mushroom embellished everything. But all 3 agreed on one detail. Alys Rivers looked far younger than she had any right to look. She had to have been at least 40 during the dance. Some accounts place her older, old enough to have served as wet nurse to Lord Lionel's own sons, Harwin and Larys, which would make her 60 or 70 at minimum. Yet every account describes a woman who appeared vital, commanding, and young. When 3 narrators who agree on nothing else agree on one fact, that fact deserves attention. The simplest explanation is the most generous to the maesters. Alys Rivers was a clever healer, an herbalist, a woman who knew the uses of plants and potions, which in the language of the day was enough to earn the word witch. War creates opportunities. Harrenhal changed hands repeatedly during the dance, and in the chaos, a determined woman with knowledge of the castle could have held it through timing, nerve, and reputation. There is a version of this story in which Alys was simply good at surviving. The evidence for it is real. Wet nurses at great castles were often bastard daughters of the Lord. This was common practice. Herbalism and folk medicine were genuine skills that maesters routinely dismissed as sorcery because they had no framework for knowledge that did not come from the citadel. And superstition is a weapon. If soldiers believed the castle was cursed and the woman inside it was a witch, Alys would not have needed real magic. She would have needed only their fear. That theory holds together neatly. Until you look at what happened to the men who came for her. Sir Regis Groves of the King's Guard was sent to retake Harrenhal with 100 men. He found Alys seated in the castle with her son. She told him to kneel. He laughed. One account says she raised her hand, and Sir Regis began to scream, clutching his head until his skull burst apart. Another says her gesture was a signal, and a crossbowman shot him through the eye. The second version is more comfortable. But only 32 of those 100 men survived. And the messenger she sent to Castle Darry died choking on nothing, with the marks of fingers pressed into the flesh of his throat. A clever herbalist does not do that. So set aside the rational floor. Something else was happening at Harrenhal, and the closest we have to testimony comes from the one man who would have known. Aemond Targaryen was many things: ruthless, proud, cold, but he was not a fool, and he was not given to superstition. He was a dragon rider who had claimed Vagar at the age of 10 by walking into her lair when grown men would not. He was a warrior who burned the Riverlands without flinching. This was not a man who believed in fairy tales. And yet, when Daemon Targaryen found Aemond at Harrenhal and asked how he had been discovered, Aemond did not credit scouts or outriders. He said, "My lady, she saw you in a storm cloud, in a mountain pool at dusk, in the fire we lit to cook our suppers. She sees much and more, my Alys. Storm clouds, pools of water, flames. That is not one method, that is 3. Fire-seeing belongs to the traditions of the East, the Red Priests of R'hllor. Water-seeing is older, tied to the magic of the rivers and the first men. And storm clouds belong to no tradition the Meisters have ever catalogued. Whatever Alys was doing, it did not fit neatly into any category the learned men of Westeros had built. Aemond did not merely tolerate her. He consulted her. He acted on her counsel. He trusted what she saw. That is not the behavior of a prince indulging a bedwarmer. That is a man who believes the woman beside him possesses genuine power. And here is the test that no dismissive theory survives. Aemond died. The battle above the God's Eye took him, along with Daemon and both their dragons. If Alys was only a seductress, if her power was merely the reflected glow of a prince's favor, then her story should have ended at the lakeshore. The source of her authority was gone. She held Harrenhal for years after his death. She defeated armed men sent by the crown. She gathered an army of broken men and outlaws who served her. Not a dead prince's memory, but her. The seductress theory requires Alys to be passive. Every single thing she did after Aemond's death was the opposite. Which brings us to the Barn Owl. When Alys faced the men who came to take her castle, she told them something that no chronicler has been able to explain away. She said, "I am no woman at all. I am a barn owl, cursed to live in human form." She may have been performing. She may have been building a myth to terrify soldiers into retreat. In the world of George R.R. Martin, ambiguity is never an accident. But consider what a barn owl is. Nocturnal, silent in flight, sees in absolute darkness, makes no sound. In the lore of the first men, these are the animals of Skinchangers, those born with the ability to send their consciousness into living creatures, to see through borrowed eyes, to fly on borrowed wings. If Alys Rivers was a Skinchanger, then the entire shape of her mystery changes. Her prophecies were not visions of the future. They were surveillance of the present. She did not see Daemon coming in a fire. She saw him arriving through the eyes of an owl circling above his column. When Aemond said she saw him in a storm cloud, he may have been describing the view from above. A bird riding the wind, looking down at a prince on a road. And there is a darker possibility still. In the far north, a Skinchanger named Varamyr Sixskins attempted something no warg is meant to do: to leap his consciousness into a human body at the moment of his own death, cheating the grave by wearing someone else's flesh. The attempt is described as the ultimate taboo, but it is described because it is possible. If a Skinchanger can move from body to body, then death is not an ending. It is an inconvenience. An old body fails. A new one is found. The consciousness continues. The memories carry forward. The woman the world calls Alys Rivers may not be the first woman to bear that name, only the latest. But this must be weighed honestly. The barn owl line was spoken with what may have been laughter. It could be metaphor. A woman who lives alone in a ruined castle, who watches everything and trusts no one, might describe herself as an owl without meaning it literally. Martin writes these lines to cut both ways. The burden of proof is on the theory, and the theory rests on a single sentence, delivered in ambiguity. Now step outside the dance entirely. Look forward by nearly 2 centuries. Another woman appears. She sees visions in flame. She appears ageless, centuries old, though she wears the face of youth. She attaches herself to a would-be king and becomes his most trusted counselor. She wields a power that the maesters cannot explain and the lords cannot control. The small folk call her a witch, Melisandre of Asshai. The parallels are striking, and they deserve to be laid out plainly. Both women claimed prophetic sight. Both appeared far younger than their true age. Both placed themselves beside warrior kings and outlasted them. Both were feared as sorceresses. Both killed at a distance. Alys with the finger marks on the messenger's throat. Melisandre with her shadows. Some have wondered whether they are the same person. They are not. And the reasons matter. Melisandre's power flows from Harrenhal, the Lord of Light, an eastern fire god worshipped across Essos. Her magic is bound to rubies, to shadow, to the rituals of Asshai. She was born a slave girl, possibly named Melanie, sold at auction on a continent an ocean away from the Riverlands. Alys Rivers has no rubies, no religion, no connection to Essos whatsoever. Her power, if real, is rooted in something older. Weirwoods, water, wind, the ancient magic of Westeros itself. These are not merely different origins. In Martin's world, the fire magic of the East and the green magic of the old gods represent fundamentally different traditions, sometimes complementary, sometimes opposed. Melisandre looks into flames and sees Harrenhal's truth. Alys stands naked in a god's wood, with her hand upon a weirwood tree. The question is not whether they are the same person. The question is whether they are the same type of person. Whether somewhere in the deep architecture of this world, there exists a category of being that the maesters never built a word for. Women of impossible age, attached to places of power, feared and needed in equal measure, never fully explained. Perhaps the word is the same. Perhaps it is simply witch, and the maesters dismissed it because they could not dissect it on a table in Old Town. And Melisandre is not even the closest parallel. In the Riverlands, the same Riverlands where Alys lived, there is a hill called High Heart. Its summit is crowned with the stumps of weirwood trees cut down by the Andals thousands of years ago. And atop that hill lives a woman who should not still be alive, the ghost of High Heart, a tiny, ancient, white-haired woman with red eyes who sees the future in her dreams. She trades prophecies for a song, one song, always the same, Jenny of Old Stones, about a woman who danced with ghosts in a ruined hall. Jenny of Old Stones brought this woman to the Targaryen court. She claimed the ghost was one of the children of the forest. Others say she is simply a dwarf. But the ghost delivered a prophecy that the prince that was promised would come from the line of Eris and Rhaella, and that single utterance reshaped the Targaryen dynasty for a generation. The ghost of High Heart is a prophetic woman of impossible age, living in the Riverlands, connected to the old gods and the Weirwood network, mourning at a place where the old magic was desecrated. She is not from Asshai. She carries no rubies. She belongs to Westeros, to the same ancient tradition that Alys Rivers seems to inhabit. If the ghost of High Heart can live for over a century, sustained by whatever power lingers in the stumps of cut weirwoods, then Alys Rivers, living beside the god's eye, within sight of the Isle of Faces, in a castle built from felled weirwood beams, had access to the deepest source of that same power in all of Westeros. And this is where the investigation reaches Harrenhal itself. Every family that held this castle was destroyed. List them. The whores, burned alive by Balerion on the day the walls were finished. The Coheries, their lord castrated and killed. The Harroways, slaughtered root and branch by Maegor the Cruel. The Towers, dead without heirs. The Strongs, burned and executed. The Lothstons, and their own witch queen, Mad Danelle, who practiced dark arts within these same walls before Bloodraven himself had to besiege the castle to end her. The Wents, who withered away until Lady Shella sat alone in an empty ruin. Every lord, every family, every name, gone. Alys Rivers is the only person who held Harrenhal and walked away from it. She was not granted the castle by a king. She was not born into its lordship. She simply remained when everyone else was consumed. Either she broke the curse, or she was never subject to it. Consider why. Harren the Black felled weirwood trees to build this castle. He cut the sacred groves. He desecrated the oldest covenant in Westeros, the pact between the first men and the children of the forest, signed on the Isle of Faces, visible from Harrenhal's own towers. If the curse was born from that desecration, from the anger of whatever watches through the weirwood network, then a woman connected to that same network would not be its victim. She would be its instrument. And then, the Vanishing. After the dance, after the failed expeditions, after the messenger choked to death at Castle Darry, the histories simply stopped speaking of Alys Rivers. The winter fever swept the realm in 133 AC and disrupted the plans to march on Harrenhal again. When the sickness passed, no one returned to the subject. No death is recorded, no capture, no surrender, no departure. The historical record does not end her story. It abandons it, and the son. A boy she claimed was Aemond Targaryen's child, which would make him the grandson of King Viserys I, a prince of Targaryen blood. His name was never written down. A claimed king whose very identity was lost. The Maesters never mention him again either. This is not how Martin writes. He tracks every lineage, every succession, every claimant. When a Targaryen bastard exists, the histories follow that thread. This silence is not oversight. It is a door left deliberately open. So what do I believe? I believe Alys Rivers was something Westeros had no word for. Not a witch. That is a frightened man's label for a woman he cannot control. Not a seductress. That is an even lazier one. Not merely an herbalist, not merely a skinchanger, not merely a green seer, though she may have been all three. I believe she was sustained by the weirwood network. That Harrenhal, built on desecrated ground, within sight of the Isle of Faces, soaked in dragonfire and blood sacrifice, sits at a nexus of the oldest power in Westeros. And Alys Rivers, whether by birth or by long exposure, was threaded into that power the way Bloodraven would later be threaded into the roots of a weirwood tree beneath a frozen hill. But where Bloodraven was consumed, his body dissolving into wood, his identity fading, Alys remained herself. She walked. She spoke. She held a castle and bore a child, and stared down a knight of the Kingsguard until his skull broke open. She was not passive in her power. She was not waiting to be consumed. She was using it. And when the histories moved on, she did not follow. She did not die. She simply stopped being seen. But that does not mean she stopped watching. So tell me this. What is Alys Rivers? A survivor? A skin changer? Or something the Maesters never built a word for? Write it in the comments. I read every theory. And if you want to be here when we unravel the next mystery, subscribe to Westeros Within and join me for the next chapter.